It's a brave thing, isn't it, to really show who you are, imperfections and all that, and to actually connect with people, like properly connect beyond the surface stuff. That willingness, that kind of courage to just be authentic, that feels like where we should start today.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're really diving deep into the power of vulnerability today.
Hmm.
And based on, what we've both looked at, it's definitely a topic that, well, at first glance, it can feel a bit maybe soft
Hmm.
or even weak.
Right.
But what's really interesting is how all these different viewpoints,
Hmm.
these seem to circle back to its actual strength.
Exactly. So, okay, our mission for this deep dive then is to really unpack what vulnerability actually means, why it's apparently so important, and how it, shapes our lives, our relationships. We're trying to get a handle on it, not as a weakness, but as a source of real strength, authenticity,
Mhm.
and those deeper connections we're all kind of looking for. Okay, so let's get right into it. Why do you think vulnerability often gets such a bad rap? Like, why is it seen as weakness, something to hide?
Well, I think that initial reaction, it often comes from, ideas that are pretty deeply ingrained in society. Think about it, we're often told, uh, value being strong, being in control.
Keep it together.
Exactly. So showing vulnerability can feel like you're, well, going against that, like you're opening yourself up to
Yeah.
getting hurt or judged. It's that fear, isn't it? Fear of rejection, the uncertainty, the discomfort of letting people see your emotions.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it's like we're conditioned almost to think showing any kind of emotional um, crack is like failing somehow. But then so much of what we've seen suggests that vulnerability is actually fundamental to courage. How do those two fit together? Seems
Mhm.
almost contradictory.
Precisely.
Hmm.
But when you really boil it down, vulnerability is about putting yourself out there. It's about being seen, truly seen, even when you have zero guarantees about the outcome.
No safety net.
None. And it takes real courage to drop that mask, to be authentic even though it might feel uncomfortable or you might face criticism.
Yeah.
That act itself, showing up as you are, despite the uncertainty that is courage. It's courage in action.
Okay. Okay. So if we flip the script then and see vulnerability as courage,
Hmm.
why is embracing it actually good for us? What are the real upsides?
Well, there are quite a few key benefits that seem to pop up consistently. First off, it builds inner strength. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable, you kind of develop this greater capacity to handle tough situations. You bounce back better.
Like emotional muscle.
Exactly, emotional resilience. And secondly, it really deepens our connections with other people. When you're open, authentic, it encourages empathy, understanding, just a stronger connection overall. People feel safer around you.
Yeah, and I can totally see how that kind of authenticity would then ripple back and affect how we feel about ourselves, too.
Absolutely. Embracing vulnerability definitely leads to greater self-acceptance. It
Mhm.
lets you acknowledge and, embrace all parts of yourself, the good, the bad, the messy. And this builds a more solid sense of who you are, more confidence, and ultimately it allows for those really authentic relationships, the ones built on real trust and understanding. Those are the connections that really support us when things get rough
Yeah.
and let us truly celebrate the good times.
Okay, so vulnerability sounds pretty powerful, but what does it actually look like? In everyday life, can we get some like real world examples?
Sure. Yeah. It could be something maybe as straightforward as taking a risk where you might face rejection,
Like what?
like asking someone out on a date, maybe,
Raw.
or putting your idea out there at work knowing
Yeah.
it could get shot down.
Yeah, that feels vulnerable.
Totally. Or it's about being honest about mistakes you've made instead of, trying to hide them or brush them off.
Right. Owning it.
Owning it, sharing personal feelings or um, experiences that you usually keep private, but sharing them with someone you trust, that's vulnerability. Even just letting yourself feel difficult emotions, sadness, disappointment, without trying to push them away. That's being vulnerable with yourself. And even, say, reaching out to reconnect with someone after you've had a falling out. That takes courage, a willingness to be vulnerable.
That example about owning mistakes, it reminds me of something I came across about a leader who admitted a pretty big error to their team. Instead of downplaying it, they were just straight up about it, took responsibility, and the effect on the team was actually positive. It seemed to build trust.
What's interesting there is exactly that point, that the leader's willingness to show they're not infallible. By acknowledging the mistake, they didn't actually lose respect. Often they gained it.
Yeah.
It showed their humanity, basically. And it created a much more open, honest environment for everyone else on the team. That's a really clear picture of vulnerability in, say, a leadership role.
It really is. Now, we kind of touched on this earlier, but vulnerability can definitely bring up some tough emotions.
hmm
How does shame specifically play into this? How does it affect our ability to be vulnerable?
Shame. Yeah, they're very closely linked, shame and vulnerability. When
Mm.
we think about being vulnerable, often there's this underlying fear of feeling shame, that awful feeling of being, flawed or unworthy.
Mm-hmm.
Vulnerability, by its nature, involves the risk of facing disappointment, maybe shame, even grief. And that fear of negative judgment, of potential rejection, it can be a massive barrier. It can trap people in like superficial interactions because they're scared to go deeper.
So it's almost like shame builds this wall, this protective shell that just stops vulnerability in its tracks.
Exactly that. But understanding how shame and courage and connection all kind of interact,
Yeah.
that's really key if you want deeper human relationships. When we can actually face and, process our feelings of shame, it sort of creates the space we need to embrace our vulnerabilities. There's a huge difference, for instance, between saying something like, I am such a failure,
Yeah.
right, which is deep-rooted shame talking, a negative view of yourself, versus saying, I failed at this task. That acknowledges a specific thing, a mistake, without attacking your fundamental worth. Recognizing that difference is so important for being able to be vulnerable and, move on.
That's a really useful distinction. Okay, but then how do we walk the line between being genuinely vulnerable and just, well, oversharing? I think that's a real worry for a lot of people.
That's a very fair question.
Yeah.
When vulnerability is sort of used like a tactic, maybe
Mhm.
to manipulate someone or get something, that's not true
All
vulnerability.
right. It feels off.
It lacks that authenticity we talked about. True vulnerability is about genuine openness, sharing your thoughts, your feelings, honestly, but also appropriately for the relationship and the context. When it's authentic, it really does foster real intimacy and trust. Oversharing, though, sometimes that can be driven more by a need for, say, attention or validation rather than a genuine wish to connect.
Okay, so the intention behind it, the authenticity, that's really key. So for someone listening who finds this whole vulnerability thing really difficult, what are some practical things they could maybe start doing?
Right, some first steps. Well, there are several things someone could try. Firstly, like we saw in that leadership example, it often starts with just recognizing and acknowledging those moments. When you feel exposed or like you're at risk of emotional pain. Just noticing what triggers those feelings and what your usual defenses are.
Becoming aware of the pattern.
Exactly. Secondly, practicing mindfulness can be incredibly helpful. Just staying present with your emotions, whatever they are, without judging them. That builds your capacity to handle that discomfort. It builds emotional resilience.
Okay, so noticing the feelings, being present with them. What else?
Well, actively challenge those ingrained beliefs, the ones that tell you vulnerability equals weakness. Consciously try to reframe what it means to you to be open and honest. Also, cultivate empathy. Really practice active listening when other people are being vulnerable with you. Try to create that safe, non-judgmental space for them.
Pay it forward.
Kind of. And setting healthy boundaries is also crucial. That allows you to be open while still looking after your own well-being. You don't have to share everything with everyone. Aim for, let's say, growth and learning, not some impossible standard of perfection. And be kind to yourself when you mess up. Treat yourself like you'd treat a friend.
That's a big one.
It is. And finally, maybe try to let go of that need to constantly prove your worth or be a people pleaser. Just offer your authentic self instead.
Those are really solid, practical steps. Now, let's circle back to leadership a bit. How does vulnerability really show up there? It feels like the classic image of a leader was always someone, totally unflappable, never showing doubt.
Yeah, that traditional image is definitely changing. What we're seeing now and what a lot of the thinking points to is that leaders who do show vulnerability actually build much stronger connections and trust with their teams.
Mm.
And those things, connection and trust, are absolutely essential for effective leadership. It makes them seem more human, more relatable. The focus is shifting away from needing to look perfect towards a mindset of continuous learning and improvement, being open to feedback.
Right.
Leaders who are willing to be vulnerable tend to create a culture where other people feel safer taking risks, being innovative, and just being themselves.
We saw that with the leader owning their mistake. Are there other ways this kind of vulnerability shows up in good leadership?
Oh, absolutely. Think about leaders who are open about their own challenges or maybe lessons they've learned from things that didn't go well, from failures. That can foster a much greater sense of empathy and connection across the whole organization.
Yeah, like Satya Nadella at Microsoft sharing personal stuff, right? That seemed to change things.
Exactly. Or creating a space where it's genuinely okay to not have all the answers, where asking for help isn't seen as a weakness, but as a strength. That encourages collaboration, a growth mindset.
Makes sense. But, okay, playing devil's advocate. Are there potential downsides? Could a leader being too vulnerable backfire? Maybe be seen as, I don't know, not strong enough.
It's a valid point to raise. Letting yourself be vulnerable, especially in a position of power, does involve a certain amount of risk. If it's not handled well, yeah, it could potentially be misinterpreted by some. It's still vital for leaders to establish their competence, their presence, their ability to lead.
So it's a balance.
It's definitely a balance. The key seems to be combining that authenticity and vulnerability with clear direction, decisiveness when needed, and competence. People respect leaders who are both capable and human, capable and honest. So while transparency is good, it's also about being, thoughtful about what you share, how you share it, and with whom. And understand that sometimes criticism isn't personal, it just comes with the role.
That's a really good point. It's about being authentic and effective. Okay, switching gears slightly. How does vulnerability connect to things like creativity and personal growth, areas that really drive us forward?
Well, think about creativity. It almost always involves embracing uncertainty, right? And the possibility of failure.
Sure.
Those things are inherent in vulnerability too. When you're willing to put yourself, your ideas out there and risk judgment, you kind of unlock this freedom. Freedom to explore new things, express yourself authentically. And that often leads to more original, innovative work, letting go of that fear of what people might think.
And personal growth.
Similar idea. Personal growth really comes from being willing to look at yourself honestly, acknowledging your imperfections, learning from your experiences, both good and bad. Vulnerability is what allows you to see yourself more clearly, warts and all, and then identify areas where you want to develop or change.
So it's about being willing to risk failure for creativity and willing to see imperfections for growth.
Okay, final area then. How can we actually create environments where vulnerability feels safer, more accepted, whether that's at home, with friends, or at work?
Yeah, fostering those environments is key. It really starts with deliberately building safe spaces, places where people feel genuinely free to express themselves without fearing judgment, ridicule, or some kind of punishment.
And how do you build that?
It requires things like active listening, really trying to hear people out, showing empathy, a genuine commitment to understanding different viewpoints, even if you don't agree with them. And leading by example is huge. When people in positions of influence or just individuals in a group are willing to be vulnerable themselves, admit mistakes, share feelings appropriately, it sets the tone, it makes it feel safer for everyone else.
So modeling behavior.
Exactly. And fundamentally, it's about prioritizing trust and what's often called psychological safety, making sure people feel secure enough to take interpersonal risks. So it really boils down to fostering that sense of safety, trust, and just leading by showing our own humanity.
Well, this has been a really insightful exploration. It's clear vulnerability is way more than just, showing emotion.
Absolutely. It's definitely not some weakness we should hide. It seems to be this really powerful pathway, doesn't it, towards courage, genuine connection, and real, meaningful personal growth. That's certainly what comes through when you look at all these different angles.
It really does. So as you, the listener, go about your day, maybe consider this. Think about one area in your life, just one, where maybe allowing yourself to be just a little bit more open, a little more vulnerable might lead to a deeper connection, or maybe unlock some unexpected strength. What's one small, manageable step you could perhaps take today in that direction? Definitely something worth reflecting on.